Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Maddie Scheier. Maddie and I are going to be discussing her journey as an athlete, how it started with basketball, and she is currently a D1 runner at the University of Miami. We talk about a key injury that she faced in her knee along the way, and how she decided to go her own path and kind of go a different route in managing that injury. We also talk about a variety of different considerations for her as a runner, what her training looks like, what her nutrition looks like, what kind of gear she likes to wear, and so much more that way. So, really great episode covering a lot of different topics, and I really appreciate Maddie's time. Episodes like this are made possible by ISOFIT and Oro. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training, and Oro is my go-to for surface EMG data and assessment on athletes in real time. For more on ISOFIT and Oro, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Maddie, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
For people who aren't familiar with you and all the amazing stuff you're doing in cross country and track and field down there all the way in sunny Miami now, would you mind filling them in a little bit about all the great things that you do?
Yeah, so being a distance runner, you run cross country in the fall, indoor track in the winter, and spring track in the spring. So all year, like I'm running, I'm training, and you really have to love it to be able to do it in college at a high level.
Definitely. And walk me through this kind of journey that you've been on with running, Maddie. How did we get involved in running? Was this something that we always kind of saw ourselves doing? How did we get involved in the sport and how did we end up down there in Miami?
So this is kind of an interesting story. I grew up as a basketball player. So I played basketball all growing up, and it was like my life, and I was set on doing it in college. And then I also ran track just like kind of for fun, starting in high school, just to like help with basketball. But my junior year in basketball, I tore my ACL. I told the doctors that I was like kind of being recruited for both basketball and track, and I wasn't sure on what to do. And they told me that I could go without getting the ACL surgery and be able to run. But if I wanted to go back to basketball, I would need the ACL surgery, which would be a whole like almost a year of recovery. So I ended up deciding not to get ACL surgery and just running. And it's now been 2 years later, and I've had no issues with my knee or anything. I just did straight rehab for a couple months and was able to get back to running. A couple doctors told me I would never run as fast, but I have. And yeah, that's kind of what led me to running. And then to Miami specifically, my older sister went here. And so I would visit her and I just loved it, loved the campus and everything. So then once I got pretty good at running and the coach started recruiting me, I visited and I love the coach, I love the team, and I just love that Miami has so much to offer, like academically and athletically. And then obviously it's a beautiful place. So that's how I got here.
There's so much to unpack based on what you just kind of outlined with your backstory there, Maddie. And
Mhm.
you told me before, you're like, it's a wild one. It's really unique. You've never heard it before. And you're right. I've never
Yeah.
heard a story like this before. Literally, a terrible thing ended up
Yeah.
kind of bringing you into the world of running, for lack of a better way to put it. It's interesting how we kind of had that love for basketball growing up, but we kind of did running on the side that way with track. And then that knee injury almost like pushed us even further into the running world that way. And it's one of those things that I've had this conversation with a lot of other individuals that way, where a lot of times surgery is not something they really want to sign up for. It's not really something that they want to do. They're not overly wild or excited about it that way. And it's one of those things that I think it always depends on the context, right? It's not
Mhm.
always, the right answer for every person. It's a matter of what's right for you and your situation that way. And it's really interesting to me as well how you mentioned that a lot of the doctors kind of told you, like, yeah, well, you're probably not going to run as fast or you won't be as good or whatever that way. And a lot of times I think we brush off what's possible based on the limited knowledge or experience that many of us have. When in
Mhm.
reality, we have to remember that given the right person, the right mindset, and the right situation, anything is possible. You probably run faster now than you did in high school, and you're proving that it's possible to
Yeah, much
literally
faster.
take a serious injury and still come back a lot stronger and a lot better than you were, beforehand. And it's not to plug the concept of, going without ACL surgery for every athlete by any means. But it is really amazing to show just how resilient the body can be and all the amazing things that you can do that way.
Definitely.
Interested to hear kind of your thoughts retrospectively looking back. What was that process like for you trying to navigate this news that you just tore your ACL and obviously talking with and meeting with multiple different doctors, parents, family involvement that way? What was that process like for you? What did you learn from it, take away from it? What kind of advice do you offer to people who might be in those same shoes now?
It was really hard for me at first. I remember when it very first happened and like I was in pain, but I was more like upset about like, wow, like now I can't play basketball now, like I won't be able to run this season. Like all those things were upsetting me even more than just the pain itself. But it took me a while to really come to this decision. But kind of what like made me make this decision was that I knew if I wanted to stick with basketball, I would likely have to have surgery, miss that whole year of recruiting, and maybe even have to reclass. And it just made more sense for me to turn to something else that I can not take as much time off and get right back to what I love doing. Because like growing up, like all I was just sports, sports, sports. Like I couldn't see myself going a year of 9 to 12 months, whatever it is, without sports. So I kind of decided to turn it into a positive thing. I also knew that basketball, I might have been able to play at a low D1 or high level D3, but I knew I would never have the opportunity to go to school like Miami for basketball. So it kind of like showed me everything happens for a reason because now I'm at my dream school and I love it and I have all the perks of being a ACC athlete. So it's pretty cool. I don't think I would have ever had this opportunity if I didn't tear my ACL, which is a crazy thing to say. But I kind of always have believed in that everything happens for a reason and that you end up where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's interesting because I feel like in the moment, you're probably questioning, why this happened to me and just kind of going through those
Mhm.
stages of grief, for lack of a better way to put it, in relation to the injury. And now that you're on the outside looking in, it's almost like a different paradigm shift in the sense that it's like, actually, I can see why this happened. And I think that's something that is really difficult for athletes to grasp in the moment because they get this bad news, this like devastating news, and that's what we kind of focus on and cling to. And I would say the other element too is you took control of your situation. You said, "Hey, yes, this happened to me, but I'm going to steer this ship the way I want it to go." When a lot of the times, unfortunately, athletes end up getting surgery and then we have to wait 9 to 12 months to be told when we can do different things. We kind of give up that locus of control to providers like myself or surgeons and that sort of thing that way. And obviously, that's how the system is built. But I think that the more we can kind of shift that control back to the athlete when and where we can, obviously within reason that way and within safety precautionary guidelines that way, but the more we can kind of shift control back to you all, the better off you all are going to be, because as you mentioned, you've probably never gone more than 6 months without doing a sport that you can remember. Sports are a way of life for you. So the thought of those not being in the picture would really be, earth-shattering kind of news that way. And I feel like it would be really difficult to navigate on many different accounts, physical, mental, and
Mhm.
so on that way. So I think the more that we empower individuals to take control of their situation and kind of grab the bull by the metaphorical horns, for lack of a better way to put it, the better off they're going to be that way. And I really love that you were able to do that, Maddie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thing I guess, as you were talking about with relation to running that way, you're kind of in the distance realm now with cross country and so on that way. Is that something that you always did when you ran track? Did you always do distance, or did we start different? Or what was this kind of running side of the journey looking like outside of just kind of falling into it because we injured our knee?
I ran like middle school and I did sprints, but I think that was just kind of like for fun and like, oh, like this will help me get faster for basketball. And then the middle school coach was like, oh, I think you'd be good at the 800. So once I decided to actually run for real in my sophomore year of high school, I like only ran the 800 and sometimes the 400. And then my high school coach was like, you got to try the mile. And I was like, no way. Like, I'm not doing long distance. Like, that's crazy. A mile's too long. And then I ran my first mile and it was like, I ran like 5:22 or something. And he was like, okay, like, this is probably your event. And then over the years, like, that did become my event. But then I also ran the 2 mile and then I decided to run cross country my senior year. And now here I am running like long distance, sometimes still some mid distance races, but yeah, so it kind of just built up as the years went on.
It seems like each season your running distance got further and further and further that way. I guess I got to ask, did we enjoy the 800 and the mile, or I hear these are controversial things in the running world.
It's a love-hate relationship for sure, especially the 800 because I still think it's like my favorite event because it's fun, but it's so hard. It's the hardest event. So it's definitely a love-hate relationship there. The mile has really become like my sweet spot because it's right in the middle. It's still pretty fast, but it's longer than an eight. So
It's always interesting when I talk with runners and athletes who run to any extent that way, like you do, how everyone kind of has their own opinions on running. And some people really love the longer distance, and some people occasionally come in and tell me how they like the 800. But I find more hate the 800 than like the
yeah.
800 that way. What does the training side of running look like for you, Maddie? And how has that evolved for you as you've gone from high school to college that way? What's kind of like the physical development side, if you will, been like for you?
Definitely the college training is a lot more intense and a lot more mileage. And I think that's been the main reason why I've improved so much since I've gotten here. But in high school, I did have two very good high school coaches that knew what they were doing, and I had good track workouts. I didn't run as high of mileage, especially when I was doing basketball and track. I hardly ran that many miles when I was still playing basketball. But like for instance, this fall for cross country training, I'm running about 50 miles per week, and I lift twice a week. And 3 of those days are just like easy runs, and 2 of those days are a workout, whether it be on the track or we do some workouts on the IM fields, or sometimes we go to the bridge for a hill work because we don't have hills in Miami. And then one day is a long run, which is for me between like 10 and 12 miles. That's kind of what a week looks like.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good balance that way. And I like how they kind of build in some easier runs for you in the week. I think they call them like shakeouts or whatever that way, or at least
Yeah.
that's the term that I hear thrown around all the time that way. And it's interesting how we jump to college, our mileage goes up, and then we get better at running. And it's like, wait, to get better at things, we just have to do more of them. And I think it's always a little bit of a balancing act that way in the sense that we should probably look to individualize that because I'm guessing while you run about 50 miles a week, there's probably someone else on your team who runs 40 and someone else on your team who probably runs like 60 to 70 that way. So I think it's probably always a kind of individual balance that way. It's so funny that you mentioned the bridge for the hill workout because that's something we run into a lot on the Eastern Shore of Maryland is there's no hills anywhere. So I literally see people all the time who will literally drive like 30 minutes to the bridge that goes over to the beach and they just run up and down that as their like quote unquote hill workout. And I'd imagine there's a lot of other unique considerations for you being in Miami, but kind of growing up in more that Northeast New Jersey corridor that way in the sense that the weather is very different down there. And when you have to travel to some of these different places you go to, like we were talking about before, like the Northeast or Wisconsin, it's a lot different than running down in Miami, I'd imagine.
I would say it makes us stronger, like training in the humidity. But then obviously there's a downside is that we don't get to train on hills as much. But whenever we do go to the cooler places for races, we feel so good because we're not used to like being able to really breathe without all this humidity here and the heat. So I think it's like a form of altitude training being down in the humidity.
Funny you say that because my mind went to the same spot that yours did in the sense that it's so hot and humid all the time, and then you go to a less humid and cooler environment, and it's notably easier to run that way. And I guess I'm interested to hear a little bit more too on the running side that way. I found that a lot of the runners I work with are very opinionated on what they wear in their gear that way. Do you have like a favorite brand of race shoes or brave favorite brand of running shoes that you like to run in that way? And what's kind of gone into, the process of you setting these amazing records that you have, whether that, just being your 5:20 mile that you mentioned in high school, which I've never run a mile that fast before in my life, or, a sub 18-minute 5K, which again, I'm probably never going to run anything that fast myself. But what's kind of gone into this whole process of achieving this like high level performance from the things that you like that way, whether that be shoes or like, snacks, game day, like, meet day routine or like that sort of thing that way.
Well, shoes, we have to wear Adidas, being at a Adidas sponsored school. We have like one of the like biggest Adidas contracts I think Miami does in the country. So everything I wear is Adidas here. But I've actually like grown to really like Adidas. I didn't run in Adidas in high school. I wore mostly Hoka's or Nikes. But I have really liked all the shoes, whether that be like our everyday running shoes or the spikes that we wear for races. I like all of Adidas gear. And then in terms of like fueling and stuff, I think I'm very fortunate to go to a school with so many resources for that kind of thing because we have like a nutritionist that works with us and we also have like a nutrition room. So they're always like fueling us, giving us post-run smoothies and like guiding us on what to eat, when, and like what we should have before races and what we shouldn't have. So I think like just being here and having all those resources has really helped me grow because there's more to running than just running. You have to fuel, you have to sleep, you have to hydrate, all those things.
And I find those are areas that a lot of runners tend to struggle with that way. So, what have you learned throughout your career as a runner about those things, and what have you found to be important, and what kind of advice do you offer to other runners about fueling and hydration and so on that way?
I think with fueling, you really just have to figure out what works best for you. Because I know even on my team, like some people like to eat certain things and other people could not eat those before a race or they would like throw up. So you really have to figure out what works best for you. And you have to do that through training because you don't want to switch it up on race day and then not feel good. That's my biggest advice for fueling. Like if one person tells you that this works for them, it might not necessarily work for you. And then with hydration, what I've learned the most being here is like electrolytes are so important. I never really had electrolytes in high school. I would just drink water and I thought that was good enough. But especially being in Miami, always sweating with the humidity, we're always given electrolytes, whether that be drip drop or liquid IV, Gatorade, anything with electrolytes, and that it's like just as important as drinking water itself.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of the mineral balance side of things and that element as well. And you're right. I think that goes often overlooked. And I really like your point on the individualization approach to this as well, because I think a lot of times we try and fit square pegs into round holes and it just doesn't work for us. There's not one correct way to do it, period. There's not one universal way to approach fueling for running. And you're right. There's so many different products out there nowadays. And what works for one person is not going to work for the next. And I think that's why there's so many different things out there because, some people really like gels. Some people really like some kind of like drink kind of thing. And some people just crush the old banana right before the race and they're good to go. So it's interesting how, you really have to self-experiment with this. And I think that it kind of makes this concept of running kind of teaches you a lot about your body and teaches you a lot of things that you might not have learned otherwise. It's like, oh, wow, if I do this, I feel really great and I can perform really well versus if I do this, I feel awful afterwards. And I think those are things that you can kind of take with you in life outside of running too, is I think realistically, if you, push yourself hard and take the sports side of running seriously, you can really learn a lot about yourself that sets you up for success later on in life.
For sure. I think all the things that I do to be a good runner are also keeping me healthy and just in general. So,
Yeah, and obviously that's kind of important as well, right? Like obviously you have achieved a really high level of performance that way in the running space. I mean, just looking back to where you started this year, right? You came in first in your I think it was your first meet with like a 17:44 5K or something
yes,
ridiculously
yeah.
fast like that, right? Like you've achieved a super high level of performance, but it's not just enough to perform, at a high level. It's also, can we keep that longevity? And obviously, it sounds like you're doing all the right things from a longevity sense as well. And I think that's something we often forget about in this space is we get so focused on the now and we want to perform really high level now that we kind of forget about where we're going to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years. And I think a lot of the times, if we can just keep people healthy, especially in the running space, if we can keep you healthy and then trust the process of a multi-year development plan, you're going to get to that high level and stay there well into your career that way. But I've seen too many
Mhm.
cases where I think people push a little too hard too early on, and a lot of careers get missed because of injuries that could have potentially been avoided just by kind of following a more long-term development model as opposed to just kind of focusing in on the now, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I think my coach did a good job with that, like easing, like as a freshman, I wasn't running 50 miles a week. I was running like 35 to 40. And then like he slowly built me up. So like just things like that, like always thinking about the future and like how can we stay injury free so that because I mean you can't improve if you're not running. So
As we were talking, obviously running teaches you so many lessons about life and so on that way. What kind of things have you learned from running, or what kind of lessons have you taken away that, you're not going to get elsewhere? You're not going to find this in a textbook or in a college class. What have you learned from engaging in this level of sport that way that you're really able to kind of take with you and apply for the rest of your life?
the main thing I've learned from running is that it's mostly mental and you have to have confidence. And this takes me into everyday life. Like I'm just a confident person overall, and I've built that confidence through sports and just trusting in like that I train every day and that I do all the right things. So like why shouldn't I be confident? And I think that's how you should live your life. Like if you're doing what you need to be successful, then you should be confident. You shouldn't have any doubts in yourself. That's really the main thing that I've learned, and that it's like grown over the years with coaches who've been confident in me. That like increases my confidence in myself, my family, just everyone who's confident in me and believes in me causes me to be confident in myself.
What kind of things, since you've had, a decent amount of experience at this point between track and field, indoor and outdoor, and cross country that way, what kind of things do you feel are essential for people to know when it comes to working with these sports that way, regardless of their title? I don't care if they're the AT, the strength coach, the head coach that way. What do you feel kind of goes into making the sport experience successful for the athlete that way?
Kind of how I mentioned, having like a supportive community. I know people aren't gonna succeed if they're in a community, like a hostile environment that they don't feel like good in because they're not gonna want to improve. You have to like want it. And me, like I want to go to practice every day. I enjoy it. And that makes me excited and makes me more successful because I'm I'm looking forward to it. Like I'm trusting in the process, just like having other people around you that believe in you and support you and don't bring you down.
And I think that's huge, is this concept of building each other up, but also like just taking the time and knowing how important it is to build a relationship with the athletes that you work with that way. I think a lot of times we have coaches, and this, applies across the gamut of the spectrum that way. But I see a lot of individuals out there who coach athletes, and that's it. And I think a lot of times athletes really like it when coaches actually take the time to get to know them a little bit more than just in relation to the sport. It's not just like running, it's like, hey, like, how are we doing today? Are we okay? How are we feeling? Should we adjust this way? Should we adjust that way? Like, I really think that, in today's day and age, it is so essential to take the time and actually get to know your athletes. Kind of like you said, the word community. I think that the more you can make your team feel like a community of individuals rather than just a group of athletes, I think it's so common we forget that athletes are literally people too, and you all have things happen. Like, you're in school right now, like you've got studies, you've got classes that you have to, attend to that way. Obviously there's different things, like some nights you don't sleep well, you could have like a dog or something like that, whatever it is that way. There's a lot of other factors that go into this whole picture of athleticism that I think we often forget about. And I think the more that we kind of show people that we care about those things and have those conversations with them regularly and just kind of show that we want them as a person to succeed, the better they're going to do in performance from a sports standpoint that way. And I
Definitely.
think that's something that, I don't know if it's like more of a high school issue or college issue or both. But I think that the more we kind of standardize that kind of approach of, just helping athletes be better, period, and just putting the focus on them more than ourselves, the better off we're going to be. I guess I'm kind of interested too to hear your thoughts that way. I know you're still young, you're a sophomore in college that way, but in the future, do you see yourself kind of jumping to the other side of running and turning around and coaching that way? And if so, what is that coaching process going to look like for you? And how has your experience as a runner kind of shaped and influenced that?
So I come from a family of coaches. My dad coaches college football. My grandpa coaches basketball, and my sister just started coaching basketball at the school that she played at, High Point University. So coaching is definitely in my blood, and I think I could see myself coaching. I'm an education major, so I want to be a teacher, and I could definitely see myself like coaching on the side. And I think I already like have a lot of leadership qualities and I enjoy like helping people get better, like helping my teammates or helping children even get better at what they want to do. So I definitely could see myself on the other side of this and being a coach one day. I don't know necessarily if I would want to coach running because I still love basketball and I could see myself coaching like high school basketball or like kids. So, but yeah, that's definitely something I've thought about.
Have you been able to play basketball, even just kind of pick up or shoot around that way, since the injury at all?
Yeah, I'm probably honestly not supposed to, but my knee feels like it never happened. Like I'm honestly in denial because I still play like I shoot around. Some of the guys on my team, we go to the wellness center and we play pickup sometimes. Very casual. Like I don't do anything crazy, but I've been able to play and I still enjoy like doing something other than running every once in a while and playing some basketball. Like sometimes we'll also play like sand volleyball. Like I like doing other like team sports to switch it up sometimes. So yes, I still play.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that you were kind of able to still, make that a part of your life that way. And I think that, something you just brought up was that kind of, I guess I'll call it cross training, but just in general, just doing different sports. I think a lot of times we get so caught up in, well, I'm a runner, so I run, period. Or, I play lacrosse, so all I'm going to do is lacrosse. And I think in reality, there's so much good that comes from kind of stepping outside of that and just getting people to move in different ways and just do other kind of sporting events that way. Here my go-to has been spike ball, so much so that I've literally got athletes that in PT we actually incorporate games of spike ball into their rehab because I think it's really, really beneficial to get a lot of reactive change direction contacts in a short amount of time. So depending on the injury I'm working with, I find a lot of bang for my buck there. But I think that to a certain extent, that kind of element of change and doing different activities and the fun that comes with the competitiveness there could really be applied well to pretty much any kind of sport. I don't care if we're talking about the basketball side or the cross country side, but I really love that you guys do that because that's something I don't see enough of, in my opinion.
And it just makes like training like it can get very repetitive, very monotonous, like running every day and like not doing anything else. That's why I also like that we lift twice a week because it switches it up too. And I enjoy like the weight room. So it's definitely important to do other things.
Yeah, walk me through that because I find a lot of times runners have this love-hate relation, just like we mentioned with the 800, but also with the weight room that way. And I think there's a lot of mixed thoughts and beliefs behind the weight room and running that way. So what's been your experience there, and what are your thoughts on lifting for runners?
I have always enjoyed it and seen it as a positive, especially because I used to play basketball, so I would lift more for that. It's definitely different lifting now. It's more just like athletic lifts and like mobility type things. We don't lift super heavy, but I enjoy it and I think it's super beneficial, especially for shorter distances like the 800 or even the mile. Like you need that strength, you need that power to get you through the race. And I think I've always been on the side that runners should be strong and like they shouldn't be super just like skin and bones, like because that is like controversial in running, but I think the weight room is super important for runners.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to your point, it's all about how you change what you're doing in relation to the person in front of you. I think obviously if we treated runners the same way we treated the football linemen, we probably wouldn't get great results. And on the flip side, if we
Yeah.
treated football linemen like we treated runners, we probably wouldn't get great results either, right? We have to understand that different sports have different demands, and we have to adapt what we do to that sport specifically. So I love how, it sounds like in your case, they were kind of able to individualize things a little bit more and create a more positive experience in the weight room for runners. And I completely echo your point in the sense that, runners should not be quote unquote skin and bones. I think that it's really healthy for runners to have some level of muscle mass and some level of underlying strength. And I think a lot of the times, even on your longer runs, like 10 to 12 miles or possibly even further at times, I'd imagine, if you don't have that base level of muscle, then, I guess we have to ask where our fuel is coming from for those kind of long distance runs that way. Because I think if you do activity long enough, you're going to start breaking down some kind of tissue in the body that way. And I think that having, a base layer of just strength and muscle kind of gives you a, for lack of a better way to put it, ozone layer against the catabolic effects that can occur when we go for the longer distances that way. So I think that's super essential. And obviously, I think it's really important just from an overall resiliency standpoint. I unfortunately end up meeting a lot of runners because they're injured and hurt, but I like to think a lot of it could be prevented if we do some of these other things a little bit more proactively that way. And I'd imagine there's so many different things that go into the scientific side of that I probably don't even fully understand that you probably have as like second nature down there, from like analyzing how someone runs to testing different things on force plates and technology and all these different things that exist nowadays. That I think it's a really exciting time to be in the running space because the space is ever evolving, and I'm seeing new events pop up to make running a more positive experience for people than I ever have before. And I think it's exciting because running, I think historically everyone has some kind of bad story associated with it. I think that it's a really empowering and enabling type of activity that should be enjoyable to people that way. And I think that the more we make it something that's fun, the more we're going to see people gravitate towards the sport.
I feel like everyone, when they hear I'm a runner, they're like, oh, running, like, how do you do that? Like, running sucks. But I always just say that, like, if you get to the point where you run enough, like, it's an amazing thing. Like, all of a sudden, it'll start to feel easy. And, like, people think that they can't run. But if you just consistently do it, like, anybody can run. And it gets easier and then it gets more enjoyable the better you get. So.
What's been your kind of go-to things for making running enjoyable, or what do you do on these longer distance runs that you do that way? Because obviously you've got some time to pass. How do we spend that time?
It's really nice having teammates to run with. So when I'm here, obviously all our runs are together. So we talk while we run, which other people find crazy as well. But it makes the runs go by faster. And it also is beneficial for us because then we're talking while we're running. And that's like in a race, we won't have to do that. So it makes it easier. But in the summer, I listen to music when I run because I run alone usually in the summer. But it definitely helps having like other people to run with. And then occasionally I will go on a silent run with no music and no people and just like in my thoughts. And that's sometimes nice too.
It almost adds like a meditative element to running in a sense that like you can just kind of like go and
Yeah.
disconnect from anything and everything and just kind of like have that time to think through things that way. And it's interesting because I certainly don't run nearly as much now as I used to, but I felt like there were so many benefits to kind of having that kind of like disconnect time every day, if you will, that I certainly miss having in today's day and age. And I would add to that as well, on that kind of social element. I mean, I think that run clubs are popping up all over the place. And obviously, I don't think everyone who does run club is going to be at the D1 level that you're at. But I love seeing this concept of running is now a social event. And it's a fun
Mhm.
event that is occasionally followed by alcohol in these run club events, which hey, if that's how you get into running, I will support the right thing for the wrong reasons here, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess in addition to coaching, you mentioned that you have the education background that way as well. I'm interested though, what else is kind of in the future for you, Maddie? What's the post-college life potentially going to look like in a few years? Are we going to continue the running career, or what does that future look like?
Yeah, so I honestly haven't thought too much about it, and I'm still a sophomore, so I feel like I have time, but I definitely want to run as long as possible post-collegiately, and still compete for as long as I can. I think it's like a blessing to be able to run well into your life. Like I know people who are in their 70s and still run races, so I definitely want to run as long as I can and compete in like track races and stuff. Hopefully one day when I'm done running short, fast distances, hopefully I can run a marathon. That's definitely on my to-do list. But outside of the running, I do want to be a teacher. I want to do special education. That's been something I wanted to do since I was in middle school. I'm pretty set on it. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I'd love to also coach on the side so I can keep the sports in my life.
Yeah, no, I love that kind of concept of running for life, I guess, if you would want to call it that. And I love that concept of being able to run beyond college. And I think that this is a sport that there's a lot of opportunities to do so. A lot of times we talk about other sports and how there's not always an opportunity to continue them following college. But I think in the case of running, this is certainly an area where I could see that as being a possibility that way. And I absolutely love that it's something that opens up doors and enables opportunities for people well beyond their college careers that way. And as we've talked about already, it's something that teaches you so much about life and teaches you so many lessons that you're not going to get anywhere else. So I think it's really, really essential that athletes get that kind of positive experience with the sport and take those things away that way and kind of develop that long-term love for something that carries them on later into their life that way. I realized that there's a lot of different things that surround this sport of running, and we probably didn't even cover all of it. And obviously, there's a lot of different personal considerations that went into your upbringing and backstory that way, from kind of how we got there following basketball to all the amazing things that you've been able to do and down in Miami since then. Is there anything that we missed or anything else that you feel is really important that you want people to kind of take away from your backstory, but also all the amazing things that you do now in the world of running?
I think the last thing that I would have is just to do something that you love. Don't go to college for a sport if you don't really love it because it's a big commitment and you have to make a lot of sacrifices to do it. So you really have to love what you do. And I definitely love what I do. So
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And it's funny because you're probably known as like the runner girl or something like that, if I had to guess. Like it's almost like part of your personality.
yeah, no, and I don't mind it. Like, I think it definitely does become part of your personality because it's like so much of what you do in college. If you choose to be a college athlete, is your sport. So,
Definitely. Maddie, for people who want to find out more about you, maybe, reach out and support through NIL deals and opportunities that way, or maybe they just want to stay up to date with all the amazing things that you and your teammates at Miami are doing in the sport of running that way, where can they find you at?
my Instagram is just my name, Maddie Scheier, MaddieScheier. So that's the best way to probably find me and reach out to me.
Awesome. We'll link to that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch that, you can just click there and reach out to Maddie and keep up to date with all the amazing things that she is up to. Maddie, this was amazing. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.